Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 82. Mok Jeongun smiled brightly and said, "How do I know the secret of the Crimson Flame Sword art, you ask?" At Mok Jeongun's words, the demon mask's eyes widened even more. Just who was this fellow? He was clearly brought here as a hostage from the Yun Mok Sword Manor and sent to the Corpse Blood Valley on that man's orders. It is his order. Don't concern yourself with whether they're hostages or not and proceed as usual. So he had taken it to mean they could even be killed. But how did this brat know about the relationship between the Crimson Flame Sword art and the fiery Yang Qi? This was a secret known only to a few, including the society leader. Only 4 people. Himself, the head of the Li family, the young master who was his successor, the master of the Sinister Valley, and the society leader. No one else in the Heaven and Earth Society knew. Overwhelmed by countless questions, the demon mask finally revealed his emotions. Smack. Grabbing Mok Jeongun's collar, he pressed the sword against his neck again. "Who the hell are you really? Are you truly the Yun Mok Sword Manor's scion?" "There's no way I'm not." "Nonsense. Does it make sense for a mere child of the Yun Mok Sword Manor to know the secrets of our family?" Suddenly, the demon mask's eyes narrowed. Right, he had thought something was strange. Could it be that person know the society leader was testing him? "Show your loyalty for 4 generations. Then I will allow the Li family to regain the title of king." That had become the Li family's shackle. To prove they had no involvement in the bloody calamity of the Horyang battle, they had stepped down from the position of king. From his grandfather's generation to himself, they had taken on the duty of the Corpse Blood Valley for 3 generations. During that time their loyalty had been tested several times. And they had firmly proven it. Soon, when his eldest son, the young master, inherited his position, they would reach the promised 4th generation. Bite. The demon mask bit down hard on his lip. "I thought we had proven enough. Was it still not enough? So had he sent this to provoke him? If he were to be emotionally swayed here, it would become an excuse, and the prospect of regaining the title of king would become distant. No, perhaps there was no intention of returning it from the start, so this continued. The demon mask gradually regained his composure. Swish. The demon mask pulled away the sword and released his grip on the collar. Then he spoke in a calm voice. "Did the society leader send you to test me?" What do you mean by that?" "Don't play dumb." Thinking about it, it was strange. It's odd to bring in 2 hostages who aren't even the eldest and have them enter here. "If you're acting on his orders, I won't interfere further." "Something. No need to say more. The reason I summoned you was to confirm whether you were a spy or not. But if you're someone sent by the society leader, there's no reason to question further." While saying this, the demon mask felt relieved that he had regained his composure on his own. If he had been provoked by this fellow or had coveted him as a talent midway, it would have reached the society leader's ears. Fortunately, he had regained his reason partway. Just then, "Why aren't you answering my question?" At Mok Jeongun's question, the demon mask frowned. Was this fellow trying to provoke him now? Glaring slightly at Mok Jeongun, he warned in a low voice. "Even if he sent you, know your place. Even if I'm not one of the 5 kings or 3 chief masters, I am one of the 4 valley masters who rank within the top 12 in the Heaven and Earth Society. The 5 kings and 3 chief masters. It was a title given to the 8 high-ranking executives of the Heaven and Earth Society. Below them were the 4 valley masters. Although the title of valley master was lower than the 5 kings or 3 chief masters, it was still certain that they were among the top 12 in the Heaven and Earth Society and were figures of power and unrivaled masters. Oh, within the top 12 in rank? Mok Jeongun thought he had obtained good information. Just then Chong Ryong's voice echoed in his mind. At this, the Li family should have received the title of king from the 3 veins. So how did you end up becoming a valley master? You dare. The demon mask flinched for a moment as his anger surged, then soon stopped. If he were not someone sent by the society leader, he would have severed an arm right then and there. The demon mask spoke with fury emanating from him. "If you don't get out of here right now, I'll cut you down regardless of whether you were sent by the society leader or not." For a moment, Mok Jeongun saw a vision of himself being cut down. Just from the murderous intent alone, it felt as if invisible sharp blades were being drawn in his mind, making his skin tingle. Perhaps because it was the first time experiencing this phenomenon rather than fear, he found it intriguing. It was like the feeling of looking at a high scenic view. This spray. The demon mask was dumbfounded by Mok Jaeongun's reaction. He had deliberately threatened him out of anger, but instead he was smirking. Was he truly gutsy? Society leader. Was it intentional this time? Had he sent him to provoke him to the end? Even knowing this test truly made it difficult to suppress his anger. Just then Mok Jaeongun spoke. Is the reason you're wearing a glove on your right hand and a mask because you still can't control the fiery yang qi and suffered burns? The demon mask's hand trembled. He barely restrained himself from reaching for the sword hilt right then. This fellow truly had a great talent for infuriating people. If you can't leave on your own feet, it seems I'll have to personally escort you out. Smack. The demon mask rose from his seat and reached out his hand to chase Mok Jaeongun out. At that moment, Mok Jaeongun grasped his sword-pointing finger and assumed a sword-drawing stance. How dare he insolently do this in front of me? The demon mask, who was about to instantly break this with the golden spiral technique, suddenly hesitated. It was because he was surprised to see Mok Jaeongun's sword-drawing stance. The demon mask's eyes trembled. Teach this is? Who among the Heaven and Earth Society's executives would not recognize the sword-drawing stance of this sword art? It closely resembled the sword-drawing stance of the heavenly vein sword art. When could it be? The demon mask looked at Mok Jaeongun with surprised eyes. Something was strange. He remembered the faces of all the society leaders' disciples. But no matter how much he thought about it, he had never seen this fellow before. Could it be that he had recently taken on a new disciple? The demon mask parted his lips with a cautious voice. Could it be that you're his? Just then, swish. Mok Jaeongun extended his sword-pointing finger towards him and gently drew a circular trajectory. It's like a full moon. Yo! Seeing this, the demon mask's pupils shook. Although it resembled the heavenly vein sword art, the flow of the form was proceeding differently. This was not the heavenly vein sword art. This is... Swish 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 smack. The circular trajectory Mok Jaeongun drew was now precisely targeting the 8 vital points along the demon mask's central line. The demon mask inwardly exclaimed at the flawless precision of the sword form. If one only considered the sword form itself without the sword intent, it was as if an unrivaled sword master was displaying sword techniques. Tap. The demon mask retreated half a step. At the same time, with one hand behind his back, he grasped his sword-pointing finger and blocked Mok Jaeongun's sword techniques without injecting sword intent or internal energy. Swish 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 smack. Although it was a light form, Mok Jaeongun's sword techniques were all blocked. Except for one. I can't avoid this. The demon mask leaped backward to avoid Mok Jaeongun's sword-pointing finger stabbing towards his brow. Because the completion of the sword form was higher than the sword techniques he had displayed, it was difficult to block the final move in any way. If Mok Jaeongun had continued his sword techniques in this state, it would have been even more troublesome. Gulp. The demon mask swallowed dryly. No doubt about it. He had never seen it directly, but he had heard about it from his grandfather. He unconsciously blurted it out. The lunar vein sword art. Oh. You recognize it. What? At Mok Jaeongun's words, the demon mask momentarily hesitated in bewilderment. He had hoped it wasn't, but was it really the lunar vein sword art? I thought the grandson of Lee Wamun might not recognize it because of the mask, but this is unexpected. He repeated exactly what Chong Ryong had said. Then the demon mask's reaction was, Shing. He swiftly drew his sword and aimed it at Mok Jaeongun's neck, emanating an immense murderous intent. Who are you? How do you know the lunar vein sword art? And what did you just say? I'd prefer if you asked one question at a time. That way he could relay Chong Ryong's words one by one. But it was truly a strong aura that made one's flesh tremble. Sizzle. The sword wasn't even touching him, but the heat emanating from it felt like it would melt his flesh. Earlier he had only felt the heat, but now the sword had become so hot that it visibly glowed scarlet. I can't block this. Could it be possible if he concentrated his death energy into a single point? It seemed unlikely. This man's martial prowess seemed no less than that of the Bright Sword King Sun Yun, who had wielded that huge blade. Hiss. Steam flowed from the arm of the demon mask holding the sword. The heat was not limited to the sword but seemed to spread throughout his entire body. The room became sweltering with heat in an instant. The demon mask glared at Mok Jae-young and spoke again. I don't have time to play word games with you. Speak immediately. Otherwise, I'll take you to the sect's headquarters right now. Take me and report that I learned the lunar vein sword art. Shut up. Smack. With those words, the demon mask grabbed the edge of his mask and took it off. Along with it, a face with one side grotesquely distorted by burns was revealed. It was a severe burn that made it understandable why he wore a mask. The demon mask spoke with trembling eyes. The lunar vein sword art's lineage has been severed. Even the only secret manual couldn't be read by anyone and was lost, so how could you? Are you asking because you truly don't know? What? You just said it yourself. That you read the secret manual? How is that possible? Even with the power of the head of the Primal Killing Pavilion, who oversaw the Heaven and Earth Society's esoteric arts, that secret manual couldn't be deciphered. Yet this fellow claimed to have read it? The demon mask No Lee Ji-young frowned. It was hard to believe he had read the secret manual, but the words this fellow was spouting were even more beyond the scope of understanding. He spoke as if he knew too much about his own family, the Lee family. That's impossible. Just by reading the secret manual. Of course you can't know. What? How could I know about the Lee family's Crimson Flame sword art or Fiery Yang Qi just by reading the secret manual? Then how do I know? At Mok Jae-young's question, Lee Ji-young frowned and spoke. Could it be that you're that person's wrong? If not descendant, then how? I'm that person's direct previous disciple, you see. At Mok Jae-young's words, Lee Ji-young's expression hardened terribly. Was this brat toying with him now? He had heard from his grandfather. The previous society leader of the Heaven and Earth Society had personally ripped out his heart, severed his limbs and beheaded him, displaying it to everyone as punishment for the crime of the bloody calamity. That was 100 years ago. But how could this fellow, who looked no more than 17 or 18, be his direct previous disciple? Are you telling me to believe those words? Are you truly wishing for death? Seeing once is better than hearing 100 times. It was as soon as those words ended. Mok Jae-young took out a wooden doll from his bosom. Then he formed a hand seal and chanted an incantation. Smack, smack, smack. Origin of the world, return to the source, release. Seeing this, Lee Ji-young was dumbfounded. Was this fellow truly insane with a death wish? He wasn't even an esoteric master, yet he was chanting some bizarre incantation. Hazy. At that moment, an unbelievable event occurred. Trickle, trickle. Blood flowed down the walls of the office, and the surroundings were becoming soaked with blood. Shudder. What in the world? Thinking Mok Jae-young had used some kind of sorcery, Lee Ji-young tried to behead him with his sword filled with fiery yang qi. Right then, Lee Ji-young's eyes widened as if they would tear apart at the sight of the figure rising from the blood pooling on the floor. A peerless beauty with blood-red eyes, wearing a crown and holding a long pipe. The moment he saw her, filled with an overwhelming presence, the image of that person his grandfather Lee Wamun had spoken of with a ringing in his ears naturally overlapped. Chapter 83. Grandfather. Is our Lee family truly not a family of traitors? Ji-young. Is that question related to the scars on your face? 11-year-old Lee Ji-young gave no answer to his grandfather's question. These things were inevitable while attending the sect's martial arts academy. Traitors, a family of betrayal. He endured all kinds of disregard and harassment. He tried to ignore it and fought back against their bullying. However, it was meaningless. It was a shackle that had come down from his grandfather, who had pledged loyalty to the disappeared lunar vein, and it was the price. Is it not a shackle that our Lee family can never escape from? Ji-young. His grandfather looked at Lee Ji-young full of scars with pity. Then, embracing him warmly, he comforted him with a gentle yet firm voice. Do you remember what this old man told you? Lying on firewood and tasting gall. Lying on firewood and tasting gall. It means to endure hardships for the future by sleeping on thorny brushwood and chewing on bile. His grandfather would habitually say those words to him. That was because his grandfather's honor, who had been one of the 10 founders of the sect and walked in high places, had fallen to the bottom after that day. Why aren't you answering? I don't know anymore. He had tried to endure as his grandfather had said. However, it was futile to try to mend his increasingly shattered heart. Why did his grandfather, his father, and he himself have to suffer like this? Even though it was not a sin they had committed just because they had pledged loyalty, did they have to be rejected by the sect to this extent? Grandfather, why don't you just pledge eternal loyalty to the society leader? That day for the first time he saw a terrifying look on his grandfather's face. His grandfather, who had never expressed it, was enraged to this degree at the mention of pledging loyalty to the society leader and escaping this stigma of a shackle. Why was he angry at him? Had he said something wrong? For the first time, a sense of rebellion arose in his surging heart. Did I say something wrong? Why must we, a meritorious family and one of the sect's founding members? Li Jiong could not continue speaking due to the ear-splitting pain. To him, suffering in pain, his grandfather spoke with bloodshot eyes. Regardless of the outcome, it is natural for a retainer to trust their lord until the end. Did this old man teach you otherwise? That so-called lord has gone astray, and our family has even been branded as traitors. But what meaning does that have? And didn't you also accept that fault, which is why you accepted being demoted to a valley master and imprisoned in the corpse blood valley for 4 generations? The more he thought about it, the more infuriating it was. Why didn't his grandfather strongly assert that he had no connection to that person? Why were they sharing in that person's sins? Because he was a retainer? I can't accept it. After that day, Li Jiong no longer conversed with his grandfather. And he gritted his teeth and immersed himself in martial arts training. He couldn't endure it without immersing himself in something. As a result of his immersion in training, he became the first in his family to successfully reach the 5th stage of the Crimson Flame Sword Art's advanced technique, the Blazing Cultivation, before coming of age. Li Jiong became even more motivated by this opportunity. I can do it. Among his family's ancestors, no one had completed the Crimson Flame Sword Art. Even his grandfather's limit was the 8th stage. This was because the more one cultivated the Blazing Cultivation, the stronger the fiery Yang Qi became, and it didn't just end with it becoming stronger but also burned the practitioner's own body. However, he was confident that he could surpass the 8th stage and reach the 9th and even the 10th stage realm. And perhaps this excessive desire became poison? Do not attempt the 6th stage until the 5th stage is perfectly ingrained in your body. Ignoring his father's warning, Li Jiong's body burst into flames as he recklessly attempted the 6th stage. Upon reaching the 6th stage of the Blazing Cultivation, one could imbue the Crimson Flame Sword Art with fiery Yang Qi, but he had failed and suffered a backlash. In an instant, the flames engulfed his arm and half of his face, and he couldn't come to his senses. The rampaging fiery Yang Qi had already surpassed the level he could control. Was he going to die like this after being too greedy? At that moment, someone grabbed him as he was rampaging, and they absorbed the rampaging fiery Yang Qi and stabilized it. The one who absorbed the fiery Yang Qi from his burning body was none other than his grandfather, Li Waman. Barely regaining consciousness amidst the pain, Li Jiong couldn't hide his shock. Like his grandfather and father, if one forcibly accepted the fiery Yang Qi without being able to perfectly control it, sizzle, the fire would turn against oneself. Thanks to taking away the fiery Yang Qi, Li Jiong's body could be stabilized, but his grandfather Li Waman was not the same. In an instant his entire body was engulfed in flames. It was on a level incomparable to Li Jiong's. Oh no. Grandfather. Li Jiong rushed forward, trying to calm Li Waman's fiery Yang Qi. However, grandfather Li Waman used his profound true energy to prevent him from entering his vicinity, making it impossible to approach. Grandfather. No, Grandpa. It had been nearly 4 years since they had been this close, and it had to be like this. Thanks to his profound internal energy, his body was slowly burning, but his grandfather's flesh had already turned red and oozing. Grandpa. Please. Li Jiong tried to forcibly break through his true energy. Grandfather Li Waman slowly shook his head at him with a bitter face. He could tell from the shape of his lips. Don't come, my grandson. That sight tore Li Jiong's heart apart. Watching his grandfather's body slowly burn right in front of him, his feelings were utter despair. He waited for his grandfather's true energy to weaken and tried to somehow subdue the fiery Yang Qi, but this was too painful. Please. Please. He begged his grandfather to withdraw his true energy. However, his grandfather did not withdraw his true energy until his flesh was completely burned away. Only when his breath ceased did the barrier formed by his true energy disappear. Ah! Lee Ji-young screamed. His despair at witnessing his grandfather dying from start to finish because of him was tragic. If possible, he wanted to exchange his life with his grandfather's. However, that was impossible. Ugh. After wailing and crying for more than half a day, Lee Ji-young could only stop when he fainted from exhaustion. After waking up like that, everything proceeded quickly and in a complicated manner. It was because he had to hold a funeral for his deceased grandfather. He confessed to everyone in the family, including his father, that his grandfather had died because of him. However, no one blamed him. Even if you were hasty, it's not your fault. It's the fault of all of us for not teaching you properly and giving weak warnings. Please. Please punish me. His father, who had become the head of the family, shook his head and firmly refused. It was because his grandfather Lee Wamun would not have wanted that. But if your grandfather had resented you even a little until his last breath, then do so. He hadn't. Even while enduring the immense pain of his body burning, his grandfather never showed it. He just kept his mouth shut with the most indifferent face possible, as if worrying about him would hurt his heart. All of that was consideration for him. Throughout the funeral, Lee Ji-young silently shed tears. After holding his grandfather's funeral amidst sorrow, Lee Ji-young came across a line of poetry left behind by his grandfather. It was like the deceased's last will. Ah, the day I looked at the black robe and followed behind always lingers. No matter how much time passes, how could I ever forget that time in my dreams? He thought he had no more tears left to shed. Yet seeing this, painful tears flowed out as if being squeezed. Even though he was one of the 10 founders, most of the executives, including the society leader, did not attend the funeral due to the stigma of disgrace. Yet he insisted on loyalty until the end. Did that mean he believed in that person that much? His heart grew complicated. Lee Ji-young found that person so hateful. However, after seeing his grandfather's last words expressing longing for his former lord, he felt conflicted. That person whom his grandfather had believed in until the end. The bastard who inherited the Lee family's orthodox lineage had insulted his grandfather's loyalty and will. Grandfather. At that moment, Lee Ji-young made a decision. His grandfather's will, which he had upheld nobly until death while enduring everything with patience. He would inherit that will. This unworthy grandson will carry on that loyalty. Even if it was a terrible stigma. Even if it was a time of suffering. He decided to carry on that will in order to restore his deceased grandfather's honor. It can't be. The master of the corpse blood valley, Lee Ji-young, couldn't hide his shock at the sight unfolding before his eyes. At first he thought Mok Jae-young was using some bizarre sorcery. However, seeing that being taking form amidst the blood, he was at a loss for words. A peerless beauty with blood-red eyes, wearing a crown and holding a long pipe. That face where arrogance and majesty coexisted. The moment he saw this, the image of that person his deceased grandfather Lee Wamun had spoken of with a ringing in his ears naturally overlapped. Don't hate that person too much. The master that this old man devoted half his life to serving was not the despicable traitor you think. That person was stronger and more beautiful than anyone else in the sect. He had just lightly brushed off his grandfather's words. It was because he didn't think it outweighed the wounds he had received while growing up. However, the moment he saw her, he understood his grandfather's words. They say those who rule are born to do so. Ah. The being before his eyes seemed literally born to rule. Just by looking down as if to subdue, he felt a shudder and even reverence at her overwhelming presence. Then Mok Jae-young's voice reached his ears. How do you feel after directly seeing that person? That person. Lee Ji-young's heart pounded and raced. Was this being before his eyes truly that person his grandfather had longed for until the end? At that moment, Lee Ji-young knelt on one knee as if his legs had given out. Thud. It didn't matter whether the being before his eyes was a ghost or whatever. He had vowed before his grandfather's spirit tablet to inherit the noble loyalty he had upheld until death. Lee Ji-young bowed his head, clasped his hands together and paid his respects. Lee Ji-young, head of the Lee family, pays his respects to the Lord, the master of the lunar vein. At Lee Ji-young's utmost greeting, a glint of interest flashed in Mok Jae-un's eyes. On the other hand, Chong Ryong glanced at Mok Jae-un with a triumphant gaze. "Did you see that, mortal?" she had boasted to Mok Jae-un. Even if the other rotten ones were unknown, if it was the blood descendant of Lee Wamun whom she knew, he would still uphold that loyalty. At her words, Mok Jae-un had inwardly sneered. A whole century had passed. Yet it was ridiculous to think that the will of loyalty would remain. "You've become a vengeful spirit, yet you believe in humans?" He found it truly foolish. Even in just a few years, everything fades. So, thinking that loyalty would continue when the person in question had died and disappeared, wasn't that just a vain hope? However, something truly unexpected happened. It turned out differently from my intention. Mok Jae-un smacked his lips. He had wanted to see her reaction, unable to hide her disappointment as her vain hopes were shattered. Yet he had ended up making her elated instead. How unfortunate. Well, it wasn't entirely bad. The fact that the loyalty had been passed down even after 100 years meant it was worth using. Just as Chong Ryong was about to open her mouth. Long. Right at that moment. Clap, 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 clap. Mok Jae-un formed a hand seal with one hand and extended the wooden doll towards Chong Ryong. Forbidden seal, formless figure. Two names become one, quickly obey and seal. As soon as the incantation ended, her spirit body, which had barely emerged, was instantly sucked into the wooden doll. With that, the blood-stained ghost realm formed by Chong Ryong disappeared, and the office instantly returned to its original state. Shudder. Noticing this change, Lee Ji-young frowned and raised his head. Where had that person who was there just a moment ago disappeared to? Of course, Chong Ryong was inside the wooden doll. Squirm. The wooden doll wriggled and Chong Ryong's voice echoed in Mok Jae-un's ear. "You damn mortal bastard. What the hell are you doing?" She had barely revealed her spirit body and confirmed his loyalty. Then she should have drawn this fellow in and given him orders, but why was he suddenly sealing her back into the wooden doll? Meanwhile, Mok Jae-un spoke. "Did you see? That person has become a vengeful spirit with lingering resentment and is with me. You bastard." Lee Ji-young stood up and looked at Mok Jae-un. That person's appearance just now was definitely not an illusion or anything like that. Lee Ji-young asked Mok Jae-un. "Where is that person?" "I just told you. That person is with me." "Then let me see that person again. I have so many things I want to ask." At Lee Ji-young's request, Mok Jae-un pointed at himself with his thumb. "Isn't that person right in front of your eyes?" "What?" At Lee Ji-young's retort, asking what he was talking about, Mok Jae-un smiled brightly and said, "I am that person's vessel of possession. It may be difficult for you to understand, but when that person possesses me, that person and I become one." Ha! At Mok Jae-un's words, Chong Ryong inside the wooden doll was dumbfounded. He had barely shown her form, so why did he seal her back inside this? Mok Jae-un's purpose was clear. That loyalty spanning generations. I'll take it for myself. Chapter 84. Chong Ryong, who had noticed Mok Jae-un's intention, clicked her tongue inwardly. What kind of guy was he? The Lee family had maintained their loyalty to her for over 100 years, spanning generations. Yet watching Mok Jae-un snatching away that loyalty in this manner made her anger surge. She felt like breaking the ceiling wooden doll right away, popping out, and beating the hell out of that mortal fellow's head with her long pipe. However, that anger did not last long. "What are you trying to do, mortal?" Rather, she became curious about Mok Jae-un's intention. He could have borrowed the power of the Lee family through her, so why did he need to snatch it away like this midway? At that moment, Mok Jae-un spoke. "You know that I am that person and that person is me, so why are you just standing there?" "That's..." At those words, the master of the Corpse Blood Valley, Lee Ji-young, suddenly hesitated. He knew well what the word possession meant. It literally meant being possessed by a ghost, didn't it? Vessel of possession for that person? Then should he consider this fellow Mok Jae-un as the master of the lunar vein? Since he did not have much faith in the strange arts, even though the Heaven and Earth Society had consulting esoteric masters, he felt somewhat hesitant. It also gave him a strangely uncomfortable feeling. Then Mok Jae-un said, "You directly saw the spirit body, yet you still can't believe it? The atmosphere and everything is completely different, so would you believe it if he suddenly lied about being possessed?" Chong Ryong clicked her tongue and interjected. At this, Mok Jaeong-un smiled brightly and said, I was confident that you would inherit loyalty spanning generations, and that's why I even revealed this secret, but it's disappointing. I know that's. Then if I keep the promise from back then, will you believe me? When you say back then? The Crimson Flame Sword art. Could it be? Lee Ji-yeom's eyes trembled. That was because he recalled the words he had heard when learning the Crimson Flame Sword art from his grandfather. The blazing cultivation was originally devised by that person and this old man together. We had tried to create the most suitable advanced cultivation technique for the Crimson Flame Sword art. However, before we could complete it, that tragedy occurred. Just like him, Mok Jaeong-un also recalled what Chong Ryong had said. Once, I made a promise with the head of the Lee family, that fellow's grandfather Lee Woo-mun, to complete the unfinished blazing cultivation together. However, that promise could not be fulfilled while alive. It was fulfilled after death. As she became a higher-grade vengeful spirit over a long time, she regained her reason and gradually realized the parts she had not understood while alive. One of those was the blazing cultivation of the Crimson Flame Sword art. Mok Jaeong-un extended his hand to Lee Ji-yeom with a smile and said, Although I have returned as a vengeful spirit with deep resentment, if the Lee family follows me once again, I will teach you the completed circulation technique of the blazing cultivation that I realized only after death. Damn you, mortal. At Mok Jaeong-un's words, Chong Ryong's frustration surged. She had just informed him of what was wrong with the technique and what needed to be changed. An ordinary person would forget after hearing it once, but this bastard has memorized it, hasn't he? Mok Jaeong-un's memory surpassed common sense. She had gotten angry and wanted to see how he would persuade without her help. But it seemed he was truly going to snatch away the loyalty. Completed circulation technique. At Mok Jaeong-un's words, Lee Ji-yeom's eyes trembled even more. 3 generations from his grandfather to himself had tried to complete the technique but failed. In fact, it was difficult to complete from the beginning. One had to bear the huge risk of directly verifying it by sending the fiery yang qi to the acupuncture points, which could cost one's life if done incorrectly. If it had been with that person, we might have completed it. Grandfather. But you should be able to do it. Recalling his grandfather again, Lee Ji-yeom's heart ached. At this, he looked at Mok Jaeong-un's face, pounded his tingling chest and knelt on one knee. I'm not kneeling because of the completed circulation technique. Then why? It's because you didn't forget the promise you made with my grandfather, no, our family, and that's why I'm pledging my loyalty once again like this. Promise. You have returned even as a vengeful spirit to resolve the long-cherished wish of my grandfather and our Lee family, so how could I dare to doubt you? Thud. Then Lee Ji-yeom completely prostrated on the ground. Lee Ji-yeom, head of the Lee family and master of the Corpse Blood Valley, once again pledges his loyalty to the master of the lunar vein. Please accept my bow. With that, he touched his forehead to the ground 3 times, expressing his respect and loyalty. Looking down at this, Mok Jaeong-un raised the corner of his mouth as if satisfied. Then Chong Ryong's voice rang in his ear. You crazy mortal bastard. What are you doing, snatching away others' loyalty? The loyalty would have naturally passed on to you if you had just stayed still, since you've become the direct previous disciple and I won't be dragging you around forever even after death. Are you feeling refreshed after forcibly taking it? She seemed quite angry. This was the first time he had seen Chong Ryong talk so much. Well, it made sense for her to be angry after he had snatched away the loyalty of a faithful retainer who had waited for her for 100 years, separate from her grudge. He probably thought he was trash. However, I understand your feelings, but my goal is not to be swayed by your hand. Mok Jaeong-un had only one reason for coming here. It was to find the ghost sword who might be related to taking revenge on the one who killed his grandfather. However, if Chong Ryong took the lead, moved her former subordinates and wielded that power, things would only flow in the direction she wanted. Mok Jaeong-un did not want the situation to be created that way. It's only secondary to me. Resolving Chong Ryong's grudge was definitely not a priority for him. She was also a vengeful spirit who would have tried to devour him if not for their predestined bond. Although they had now established a master-disciple relationship due to their absolute bond of fate, Mok Jaeong-un fundamentally never trusted anyone. Therefore, he had no intention of giving Chong Ryong the initiative. Is this the circulation technique completed by you, my liege? The master of the Corpse Blood Valley, Lee Jiom, received the circulation technique written by Mok Jaeong-un with trembling hands. It had been the aspiration of the family to complete the technique for 3 generations, so he could not hide his excitement. Exclamations flowed from Lee Jiom's mouth as he read through the technique. Ah! How could they have approached the qi circulation method in this way? Lee Jiom spoke in amazement. It's truly remarkable. I never thought of directly circulating the fiery yang qi from the diaphragm to the yang acupoints. But if this works, it seems we can control the energy to enter the 9th stage. To devise this so easily. Easily devised, my ass. I only realized it after death when my ghost eyes opened. Chong Ryong grumbled in an angry voice, still not appeased. An advanced cultivation technique like the blazing cultivation that could directly handle fiery yang qi had a high risk in the first place, so it could only be completed after countless trials, errors and sacrifices. In a way, from Lee Jiom's perspective, it could be said that he had encountered a fateful opportunity. As he continued reading the technique, Lee Jiom frowned. Then he carefully said to Mok Jaeong-un, "But my liege, it seems you haven't written the entire technique." "That's right. Pardon. I only wrote half of it." At those words, Lee Jiom was about to ask why but soon closed his mouth. Looking at Mok Jaeong-un's smiling face, he could guess what his intention was. "Did you do it on purpose?" "That's right." "Why did you?" "Even though I completed the technique, we should be careful. I did it because I was worried that you might be too hasty and get burned again." "Ah." At Mok Jaeong-un's words, Lee Jiom let out a small gasp. Was it because he was concerned that he might bring about a situation where he would be consumed by the fiery yang qi if he recklessly tried to master the completed technique? He seemed to have misunderstood. He had thought that it might be because Mok Jaeong-un couldn't fully trust him yet. Chong Ryong snorted. "Even after receiving a pledge of loyalty, you sure have a hard time trusting." She knew Mok Jaeong-un well. She was certain that the reason he didn't teach the entire technique was definitely not out of concern for Lee Jiom. Yes, correct. Of course that was accurate. Mok Jaeong-un did not completely trust Lee Jiom even though he had pledged loyalty. That's why he had only provided the appropriate bait. Trust him moderately. I guarantee you Lee member's loyalty towards me. At her words, Mok Jaeong-un showed a faint smile. Her trust in her former loyal subordinate was her freedom. But he was different. He intended to maintain some level of vigilance until he was certain. At that moment, Lee Jiom put the paper with the technique written on it into his bosom and spoke. "But my liege, if it's not disrespectful, may I ask what happened that day at the Horyang battle 100 years ago?" "Horyang battle? What was that?" At his question, Mok Jaeong-un's eyes narrowed. He didn't expect the master of the Corpse Blood Valley, Lee Jiom, to suddenly ask about Chong Ryong's past that he didn't know about. At this, Chong Ryong spoke in a sneering voice. "Do your best. I won't help or interfere with anything related to the Lee family, especially with you, mortal." She had no intention of telling him the information since he had snatched away the Lee family's loyalty. It meant for him to bear the hardship properly. Horyang battle. It was a memory she could never forget. That memory had become the root of her becoming a vengeful spirit. In the first place, she had no intention of telling this mortal fellow right away, so she thought it was perfect. Just then, Mok Jaeong-un spoke nonchalantly. "You want to know about that?" At this, Chong Ryong was dumbfounded. Was he asking what he wanted to know without knowing anything? Then Lee Jiom replied. "Yes. My grandfather believed in her liege until the end, but due to the incident that day he was demoted from a king to a valley master, and our main family was expelled from the castle and has been imprisoned here in the Corpse Blood Valley for 3 generations. Ah. At Lee Jiom's words, Chong Ryong felt bitter. The Lee family was a founding family of the Heaven and Earth Society, yet they were humiliated like this. Just how far were they willing to insult her and ruin the Heaven and Earth Society? Indeed, she could never forgive him. At that moment, Mok Jaeong-un said, "How does the Valley Master know about what happened that day at the Horyang battle? I'm curious about how you and the sect know about it." "What?" At Mok Jaeong-un's question, Chong Ryong inwardly clicked her tongue. This fellow always found a way out somehow. On the contrary, she did not expect him to throw a question back like this. No, was it because he could come up with words in any way since he had no difficulty lying at all? "You mortal bastard, really?" As she found it absurd, Lee Jiom carefully said, I apologize, but is it alright to tell you this as it is? It's fine. You have to tell me as it is so that I can tell you what happened that day at the Horyang battle. Mok Jae-un spoke as if he didn't mind. While doing so, he glanced at the wooden doll in his bosom and smirked. You should have just given me a hint. Then there would have been no need to be led like this. But could he find out what kind of relationship Chong Ryong had with the Heaven and Earth Society and what secrets she held through this? Chapter 85. Damn mortal bastard. Was he finally trying to find out about her past in this way? For a moment, she pondered whether she should break the seal of the wooden doll and leave. Just then, the master of the Corpse Blood Valley, Li Jiom, spoke. Since my liege has spoken thus, I will briefly commit a discourtesy. How did the incident of that day? Damn mortal. Stop him right now. My past in this way. Feeling desperate, she shouted for him to stop. However, Mok Jae-un had no intention of doing so. In any case, if he encountered something related to her past like with the Li family, he would find out what had happened one way or another. Just what had she experienced to become a vengeful spirit? Flinch. At that moment, the master of the Corpse Blood Valley, Li Jiom, and Mok Jae-un simultaneously looked in a certain direction. It was towards the outside of the building. What is it? Why are you acting like that? Chong Ryong, sealed inside the wooden doll, could not sense the external energy. So she was puzzled when the two reacted simultaneously like this. The master of the Corpse Blood Valley, Li Jiom, had already approached the window. Clack. As he opened the paper-covered window, the courtyard in front of the lodging was revealed. There were red-belted warriors standing guard in front of it and nothing was happening. At this, Li Jiom slightly tilted his head. He was sure there was something that stimulated his senses just now. But it had disappeared in an instant. What was that? The energy he felt just now was too ominous to ignore. However, now that it had disappeared, it was difficult to search for it blindly. As he pondered this, Mok Jae-un spoke. Valley Master. Yes, my liege. It doesn't seem to be anything. May I go out for a moment? Pardon. At Mok Jae-un's sudden mention of going out, Li Jiom frowned as if in a difficult position. On the other hand, Chong Ryong inside the wooden doll inwardly felt relieved. She didn't know what was going on, but thanks to that, the attention could be diverted. About a quarter of an hour ago, on a mountain hill about 1 li, approximate 0.5 kilometers, away from the lodging, there about 10 red-belted warriors were transporting 4 spies whose energy cores had been destroyed and whose bodies were restrained. Among the spies was Nung Hwayong, who could be considered the only female. The other spies had resisted, getting their arms and legs cut off, and were unable to endure the pain of having their energy cores destroyed, so they all fainted. However, she was the only one still conscious. The reason was that she was possessed by Gyu So-ha. Gyu So-ha couldn't hide her regret. She had barely obtained a decent body, but it was a pity to use it and discard it like this, but she had to carry out her master's orders. When the time came, she believed her master would find her a suitably decent body. If that happened, will I be able to see that person again? Her own younger brother who had driven his own flesh and blood to death. She had endured on the cliff of solitude with her anger towards him. If her master went into the castle of the Heaven and Earth Society, she might see him again. It had been 15 years since her death. There was no way he would have died in just that time. You damn bastard. If only you die, everything will be resolved. You. Acting all superior every time, pitying me as if you had everything. I'm not. You were just born before me, that's all. Clench. Strength entered her hand. The last face she saw at the moment of her death was his face filled with ecstasy. With that face he had repeatedly smashed her face with a rock. It was an indelible yoke of hatred. Creak. While she was pondering this, the cart carrying them suddenly stopped midway. Wondering what was going on, Gyu So-ha squinted and observed why. The red-belted warriors were greeting someone. Both were wearing Taoist robes. One was a white-haired old man, and the other was wearing an eye patch and leaning on a cane. One of the senior warriors leading the red-belted warriors clasped his hands together and greeted. Bong Yang, a senior warrior of the Corpse Blood Valley, greets the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion. The identity of the old man was none other than In Seok, the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion, which was in charge of esoteric arts consultation under the Heaven and Earth Society. And next to him was the middle-aged man with the eye patch leaning on a cane, his disciple and Taoist master Zhou Yuigong. Why have they come here? Bong Yang, the senior warrior of the Corpse Blood Valley, couldn't hide his bewilderment. That was because there were Taoist masters dispatched within the Corpse Blood Valley, so there was rarely any reason for the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion to come here. However, he couldn't figure out why they had come here. Just then, In Seoke, the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion, asked the senior warrior, "Were there any unusual incidents during the checkpoints?" At his question, the senior warrior slightly frowned. Although he was cooperating under the society leader's orders, matters related to the checkpoints were ultimately the responsibility of the master of the Corpse Blood Valley and his subordinates. He had no obligation to report to the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion. Is this old fart trying to create more trouble? He was already doing the bothersome task of categorizing and moving the corpses one by one because of the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion. So he was even more reluctant to say anything. Perhaps his thoughts were showing on his face. "Hey, do you take the Primal Killing Pavilion lightly?" The pavilion master is asking, "So why aren't you answering?" Zhou Yuigong frowned and pressed him. At this, the flustered senior warrior hurriedly spoke. "No, that's not it. How could that be? There were no major problems in conducting the checkpoints." At his answer, Zhou Yuigong clicked his tongue as if dissatisfied. The warriors of the main castle were mindful of the Primal Killing Pavilion, which was favored by the society leader. On the other hand, the warriors of the Corpse Blood Valley were not. Was it because the master of the Corpse Blood Valley himself was close to being rebellious, as the Blade King had said? Does the pavilion master coming all the way here seem like nothing special happened? What do you mean by that? The cliff. Swish. At that moment, In Seoke, the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion, extended his hand and cut off Zhou Yuigong's words. Zhou Yuigong closed his mouth and quietly stepped back, unable to upset his master and teacher. Then In Seoke, the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion, spoke with a somewhat serious expression. "Don't ignore my words. Something unusual is happening. If there's even the slightest suspicious or strange incident, speak of it. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to report to the society leader and halt the checkpoints of the Corpse Blood Valley this time." Pardon? What on earth was he talking about? Why would he halt the checkpoints of the Corpse Blood Valley that were proceeding normally? The senior warrior couldn't help but be perplexed. Just what had happened for the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion to personally come here and say such things? Was there really nothing unusual? In Seoke, the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion asked again. At this, the perplexed senior warrior Bong Yang hurriedly spoke. There was nothing that could be a problem. The Taoist master in the cave also said it was fine that the monster making pig squealing sounds died during the previous checkpoint. Wait. Yes. What do you mean by that? In Seoke asked with narrowed eyes. At this, senior warrior Bong Yang carefully repeated what he had said. The monster making pig squealing sounds died. Galgio? Galgio died. Did that monster also have a name? He wasn't sure what it was, but it seemed to refer to that wolf monster making pig squealing sounds. So senior warrior Bong Yang nodded and replied. Yes. It seems to have died during the second checkpoint. What do you mean? In Seoke, the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion, couldn't hide his bewilderment. That was because he knew how the checkpoints were conducted due to the thing in the cave and the spirit god parasitic poison art. Moreover, didn't the Primal Killing Pavilion manufacture the flag used in the second checkpoint? In the first place, the key point of that checkpoint was to run away from the monster, and there was no one who could catch it. That can't be. One of the trainees killed it. What? You're saying one of the trainees killed Galgio? At these words, In Seoke, the pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion, couldn't hide his surprise. Even ordinary wolves were difficult to deal with without weapons or martial arts. Yet they were saying that among the boys aged 16 to 19, there was someone who killed the phantom wolf with bare hands? Is that true? He found it hard to believe. Zhou Yuigong also seemed to have the same thought as his master In Seoke, as he asked back in disbelief. Then senior warrior Bong Yang spoke as if frustrated. Say, it's true. We also couldn't believe the report at first, but that kid tore apart the monster's mouth and killed it. If you truly can't believe it, the monster's corpse should be in the cave. What? tore apart its mouth. No. Can't you just go and see for yourself? At senior warrior Bong Yong's words, Zhou Yuigong was dumbfounded. There were also ranks among the phantom wolves. Even the lowest grade, the fierce beast, required Taoist masters to be at least at the moon level to deal with it. Let alone the monstrous beast, which was one rank higher. It was something an ordinary human could not handle. As he was in disbelief, In Sioke, the pavilion master of the primal killing pavilion, asked, "Is the trainee safe at least?" "He's safe. Rather, he was less injured than the other trainees." "Pai word." An exclamation flowed from the mouth of In Sioke, the pavilion master of the primal killing pavilion. Just what kind of fellow was he to be able to do such a thing with bare hands? From the perspective of a Taoist master, he couldn't help but be interested. So he asked, "May I ask for the name of that trainee?" Well, that wasn't difficult. "It's a kid named Mok Jiangun." "Master." As soon as those words were spoken, Zhou Yuigong called out to In Sioke, the pavilion master of the primal killing pavilion, in an excited voice. He was so surprised that he unconsciously called him master as soon as he heard the name. Realizing his mistake, Zhou Yuigong suppressed his excitement and spoke. "It's that child. That child. Didn't I tell you? The child I accepted as a disciple was sent to the Corpse Blood Valley by the society leader's order. So please inform him." At those words, In Sioke, the pavilion master of the primal killing pavilion, frowned. The child his disciple he had accepted as a disciple had killed the monster? This was quite surprising. So he asked, "When did you accept that child as a disciple?" "It hasn't even been half a month since I accepted him." "What?" The eyes of In Sioke, the pavilion master of the primal killing pavilion, widened. A kid who had only received teachings on esoteric arts for half a month had single-handedly caught the monster Galgio? Since he was sent to the Corpse Blood Valley, he wouldn't have had talismans or magic tools, right? Then Zhou Yuigong whispered to him. Just in case, the disciple gave him a ring with incantations inscribed on it. But even so, isn't it remarkable that he did this alone with his own strength? At his words, In Sioke stared intently at Zhou Yuigong. He knew better than anyone what a ring with incantations inscribed on it was. He had directly taught the method of making it, so there was no way he wouldn't know. However, even if he had that, catching a phantom wolf of the ghost beast level was definitely not an easy task. No, it was practically impossible. If what Yuigong says is true, he has accepted a disciple with an absurdly outstanding talent. He had no choice but to acknowledge it. He understood why Zhou Yuigong had insisted so much on informing the society leader. If he had that level of talent, it was only natural for him to do so. I want to see him in person. What kind of fellow he was. However, there was something he had been suspicious of from the start. He had tried to brush it off, thinking there was no way, but this feeling was unmistakable after all. "Hand me the cane." "Pardon? Didn't I tell you to hand it over?" At his master's words, Zhou Yuigong looked puzzled but handed over his cane. Then In Sioke, the pavilion master of the primal killing pavilion, lightly tapped the ground with the cane. Thud. Jingle jingle. At that moment, the silver coins on the head of the cane shook strongly. Along with it, In Sioke, the pavilion master of the primal killing pavilion, muttered softly, "Myongekyo siwananjong jiawanjiayin." Swoosh. The jingling sound of the silver coins gradually grew louder. Then finally, thud. The red-belted warriors who had been nodding off, collapsed on the ground as if they had fallen asleep. Even the senior warrior Bongyang was no exception. What on earth is... Thud. Master, what? Zhou Yuigong couldn't hide his bewilderment at In Sioke's sudden incantation. That was because his master's chanted incantation was not just for putting people to sleep or making them faint. It was invisible to ordinary people's eyes, but to Zhou Yuigong's eyes, the gray-colored lines that appeared whenever In Sioke shook the silver coins on the cane were clearly visible. Swoosh. The gray-colored lines that appeared like that created a semicircular curtain covering a distance of about 15 jang, approximate 50 meters. Spell power barrier. Spell power barrier. It was a barrier created by a Taoist master's spell power. Among the Taoist masters of the Divine Sun Moon Profound Transmission, only those whose spell power reached the sun level or higher could create it, and it was comparable to the ghost realm created by high-grade vengeful spirits. However, why did his master In Sioke, the pavilion master of the primal killing pavilion, suddenly create a spell power barrier? Just then, swoosh. At that moment, chains shot out from the cart carrying the spies and pounced on Insioke, the pavilion master of the primal killing pavilion. Master. Swish. Don't interfere. Insioke shook his head and lightly swung his cane. Then the chains that had been rushing towards him were all bent and crashed to the ground. This is. Zhou Yuigong instantly realized that the chains were made of spiritual power. He looked at the cart. Ugh. There he saw a girl with black blood vessels bulging all over her body writhing. The girl was the spy Nung Huayang. Looking at the girl suffering in pain, Insioke, the pavilion master of the primal killing pavilion, lifted the corner of his mouth eerily and spoke in a meaningful voice. So this is where my goo poison was. Chapter 86. Spirit God Parasitic Poisoning Technique. 1. It was a technique referred to as a forbidden secret art. More than 60% of the current magical techniques were derived from Taoism, and there once existed a Taoist sect that popularized and brought prosperity to these techniques. That was none other than the Mozen sect. 2. Insioke, the primal killing pavilion master, was no exception. When he reached the age of Gapja, 60 years old, 3. He discovered various secret techniques engraved inside a deep cave in the valley. One of them was none other than this spirit god parasitic poisoning technique. The gods of heaven and earth have aided this master. Upon discovering this, the primal killing pavilion master could not hide his joy. However, that joy did not last long. It was because more than 80% of the secret techniques he discovered were prohibited by the 64 diviner sects. That was understandable, as most of the sacrifices for the techniques were living beings. This cannot be. At this, the pavilion master of primal killing pondered deeply. The world of the forbidden, which had been barren until now, was on the verge of opening, but as a diviner pursuing the ultimate heights of magic, it was unacceptable to let it go to waste due to the rules. Therefore he left the 64 diviner sects and joined the Heaven and Earth Society. He made this decision with the conviction that only the Heaven and Earth Society could fulfill his aspirations. Screech. Arg. On the cart, Agent Nung Huayang, or rather Gu Soha, who was possessing Nung Huayang's body, could not endure the pain. That was understandable, as it was difficult to maintain the possessed state due to the immense spiritual pressure. Damn it. Moreover, the timing was not favorable either. Thanks to the dense undergrowth, the sunlight was somewhat shielded, but during the day when the energy of Yang was abundant, the ghost was inevitably weakened. This was true even for those of high ranks. Bulging. The black bulging of blood vessels was a symptom of weakening possession. I need to escape. Yu Soha instinctively reached a conclusion. The two humans before her eyes were completely different from ordinary individuals. Especially that old man holding a staff was a true monster. The spiritual force emanating from the man's entire body was overwhelming the surroundings. Pat. Enduring the pain, Yu Soha jumped off the cart and leaped backward. However, there was another problem here. The two meridians in the legs of this body were severed, and its Danjian had already been destroyed. Damn it! If it were not a weakened state or daytime, she could have controlled the body and restored it to some extent, but now it was impossible. After a moment of contemplation, Yu Soha decided to abandon the body. In the current situation, this body was nothing more than an obstacle hindering her escape. Swish. Thud. Nung Huayang's body collapsed to the ground. Simultaneously, Yu Soha, who had emerged from the body, tried to soar into the sky. However, whoosh. A gray membrane covering the sky and extending to a radius of 15 jang. Seeing this, she was at a loss for words. What kind of human? Could they create something like a ghost's domain that only the high-ranking ghosts could form? The spiritual pressure created by their spiritual force was also absurd. Having been trapped alone in the cliff, she did not know much, but this was not a monster she could handle even at night. TSK. However, she could not just stand still. Swish. Yu Soha reached out her hand toward the sky. Then numerous iron chains erupted from the ground, converging toward a single point. She then concentrated her power, trying to break through the membrane in any way possible to escape. However, ho. Who said I'm letting you go? The Pavilion Master Insioke of the Primal Killing Pavilion formed hand seals with his left hand. He wielded his staff, sweeping it across the Jumgangji Vidramadra, Doji and then Jiamjialji seals. Then strangely, whoosh, The tree trunks in the undergrowth elongated, and they flew like whips, grasping the iron chains created by Gyusoha. Ah! Gyusoha hurriedly waved her hand downward. Then some of the iron chains changed direction, targeting Pavilion Master and Seoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion. At that moment someone blocked the way. It was Diviner Zhou Yuigong. I'm... 2. Gi. J. They were the hand seals of the 9-character technique. Overlapping the index and thumb fingers of both hands, he aimed at the charging iron chains. Clang. Crash. The iron chains bounced off and flew back toward Gyusoha. It was the reversal technique among the 9-character techniques. In an instant the iron chains that flew back pierced through the thigh of Gyusoha, who was trying to dodge by twisting her body. Aarg. With the weakened spiritual body, it was naturally painful when the chains pierced through. However, if she made the iron chains disappear, they would be crushed by the tree trunks, and it would be futile to gather them at a single point to break the membrane. I must endure. Whoosh. The iron chains collided with the gray membrane, and blue and red sparks simultaneously flashed like lightning. It was a phenomenon caused by the clash of spiritual force and spiritual energy. Where are you trying to escape to? Diviner Zhou Yuigong took out a talisman from his bosom and tried to chant a spell. But before that, Master In Seoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion took out a talisman first and threw it toward the green spirit Gyusoha. The demonic fire burns and the strong spirit transforms. Hurry up. As soon as the spell ended, whoosh, the flames took the form of a bird and flew toward Gyusoha. With the iron chains stuck in her thigh, Gyusoha could not move and was directly hit by it. Boom. Aarg. With a scream, the iron chains that were shaped by spiritual energy disappeared. Then Gyusoha fell to the ground. Gyusoha, whose entire body was charred black by the flames created with spiritual force. Her condition was far from ideal. Damn diviner. Ho-ho. Your mouth is foul. This Valley Master is like a parent to you. Swish. Pavilion Master In Seoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion waved his staff, and the sound of clinking coins accompanied the golden glow emitted by the red letters engraved on the surface of the staff. Along with it, an earthen hand erupted from the ground, simultaneously grasping Gyusoha's arms and legs. Grab. Grab. Let go. Do you think you can escape? Screech. Gyusoha tried to generate spiritual energy and create iron chains. However, when her arms and legs were grabbed, it became strangely difficult to exert strength. It's useless. No matter how high your rank is, when caught by this spirit trap hand, your spiritual energy disperses, and you cannot exert strength. Ugh. It was difficult to deny as she felt her own strength gradually draining away. It was to the extent that she could even feel her spiritual body going limp. Meanwhile, Pavilion Master In Seoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion approached Gyusoha, leaning on his staff. Then he lifted Gyusoha's chin with the end of the staff. Swish. Ho. It has matured better than expected. Roar. Gyusoha opened her mouth like a beast, trying to appear threatening to Inseo. However, it had no effect. Rather, Inseoke clicked his tongue and said, "Since it hasn't been tamed yet, it bears its fangs like a wild beast. But don't worry. This Valley Master will refine you to be quite useful. Don't make me laugh. Human. Ho ho. You have completely forgotten the fact that you were once human. Well, it is a sign that your rank has increased, so it's not a bad phenomenon." Master In Seoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion seemed rather satisfied. To him, his disciple, Diviner Zhou Yuigong, approached and said, "Master, is this it?" "That's right. If it had matured a little more, we could have created a blue spirit in a short period, which is truly regrettable. Even so, it's really remarkable, Master." Zhou Yuigong spoke with a genuinely astonished expression. That was understandable, as a ghost with this level of rank was artificially born in just 15 years. It was an achievement that no diviner had ever accomplished. Of course, there would be no one who would welcome such an achievement. Shall we ripen it further in solitude? No. It's too risky. Risky, you say? Once the technique is broken, it becomes difficult to continue the solitude technique. Although it's regrettable that the rank is somewhat lower than expected, it's sufficient to make use of it to this extent, so we should create a new jar. Gur. At these words from the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, Gyusoha gritted her teeth. She didn't understand what they were talking about, but from what he heard, were these people the ones who created that hellish cliff? Upon learning the truth, anger surged within her. Damn old man. Whoosh. Ho ho. As expected of a ghost, your anger alone is enough to try to recover your spiritual energy. But... Clink clink. Arg. When Inseoke shook the coins on his staff, Yusoha covered her ears and writhed in pain. The sound generated by the coins engraved with incantations caused pain that stimulated the spiritual body of ghosts. If you don't want to become a servant spirit, it's best to stay still. Ugh. Perhaps feeling fear at the mention of becoming a servant spirit, Yusoha flinched. No matter how much of a ghost one was, it was natural to feel fear at the mention of becoming a servant spirit. Seeing such, Yusoha, Master Inseoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion stroked his beard and said, "But I'm truly curious." "About what, Master?" "This Master's spirit god parasitic poisoning technique is perfect. But I don't understand how it managed to escape. There was not the slightest flaw in the technique. Yet it was broken. If this green spirit before his eyes had been completed to the level of a blue spirit, it would have been understandable. But that wasn't the case either, so it was incomprehensible. Could it be that Taoist Yun neglected the management of the cliff? That's impossible. This Valley Master also periodically checked on it." At the Master's firm words, Diviner Zhou Yuigong scratched his head, looking embarrassed. Then Master Inseoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion shook his head and took out a talisman from his bosom. "Well, it doesn't matter either way. If it wasn't due to negligence, we can investigate and find out gradually." With that, he brought the talisman to Yusoha's forehead. Sensing an ominous feeling, Yusoha tried to turn her head to avoid it. "I told you it's useless." Inseoke forcibly attached the talisman to her forehead. The talisman had the following written in red ink. Fated Connection. Master Inseoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion spoke as if he wanted his disciple, Diviner Zhou Yuigong, to listen. "Watch carefully. I will show you how to turn a ghost born from the spirit god parasitic poisoning technique into a servant spirit." Anticipation appeared on Inseoke's face. That was understandable, as it was nearly impossible to use a ghost as a servant spirit under normal circumstances. However, this technique, which was connected to the spirit god parasitic poisoning technique, could make the impossible possible, surpassing all existing magical systems. Servant spirit creation technique. With those words, Inseoke chanted a spell. "The heaven and earth, yin and yang, bless this day, the divine and wondrous spirit, obey my command, gather the water and soil, fulfill my wish. On this day I enter the tomb, communicate with the spirit, receive my wish, depart from evil, return to good. The spirit faces upward, hurry up." Whoosh. As soon as the spell ended, the talisman burst into blue flames. Then the ashes glowed faintly and scattered over Yusoha's entire body. Watching this, the corners of Master Inseoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion's mouth curled up. It was finally the moment he had been waiting for. If a high-ranking ghost can be used as a servant spirit, it might even be possible to use that as a servant spirit, which was called a calamity. Inseoke smiled and spoke to the green spirit Yusoha. "Who is this master?" Now he expected the word master to come out of Yusoha's mouth. However, just as he was watching with anticipation, "Shitty old man." Master Inseoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion frowned. What? Yusoha should have become his servant spirit through the servant spirit creation technique. But why wasn't this spirit calling him master? Was it because its rank was high and its self-awareness was strong? Then, call this master your lord. Get lost. The eyes of Master Inseoke of the Primal Killing Pavilion narrowed. Something was wrong. There was clearly no problem with the technique. So why wasn't it serving him as its master? Inseoke spoke in a voice filled with anger. "This master is your lord. Obey this master's command at once." "Who says you're my lord?" "Fucking old man. If you want to act like a master, bark like a dog in front of me. You bastard." Finally, the enraged Inseoke struck Yusoha's head with his staff. Thwack. Yusoha, hit by the staff engraved with incantations, let out a scream of agony. "Arg. This master is your lord." At that moment, someone's voice was heard. "Old man. Why are you beating someone else's dog like that?" "What?" At the sound of the voice, in Seoke the pavilion master of primal killing frowned and looked in that direction. There stood an exceptionally handsome boy who had approached unnoticed. It was none other than Mok Jaeung-un. I am its owner. At this voice, the green spirit Gyu Soha shouted with a face filled with delight. Master! Master! The expression of In Seoke, the pavilion master of primal killing, distorted frighteningly. Footnotice. 1. Right arrow curving left. 2. Mt Mao, Daoist Mountain southeast of Jurong County, Jurong, Jiangsu Province. The Mozen sect was a renowned sect in Taoism, but it had been extinct for a long time. Now not even a trace of it remained. There were various theories about its extinction, but the most prominent one attributed it to the sect's submission to and collusion with the government during the martial world's persecution under the 6th emperor of the Yuan dynasty. Although most of the techniques that remained in the extinct Mozen sect had lost their successors, occasionally some of these past legacies were discovered. One of them was, alas, I thought the spirit god parasitic poisoning technique had gone to waste. It was the spirit god parasitic poisoning technique discovered by In Seoke, the primal killing pavilion master. The successive masters of the primal killing pavilion, based in Shaanxi province, had often explored the collapsed valley once called Sealed Forest, Bongrim. Right arrow curving left. 3. Right arrow curving left. 4. A hand formation, right arrow curving left.